Yesterday I didn't do a video. I spent a lot of time at the beach. It was so hot here where I am, 38 degrees. My favorite pink tree melted. But at the beach it was probably 20 degrees cooler. Well, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, so I don't know what that is in Celsius, but a lot cooler, and it was perfect for getting sun and not burning, just tanning. I went in the ocean and the waves were so intense, and I jumped in them and jumped under them, and they nearly took my bathing suit off a few times. And after being in the water half an hour, I realized my head really hurt, so I got out. I guess that's what water in the ears feels like, or just when the waves are crashing against one. So that was really fun, and maybe I'll do a video every other day instead of every day. We'll see. I talk about these things just to myself, but I never really know how it will unfold. And I forgot to share that up to a week ago, I took off my reminder that is set through an app called Voice Secretary that pops up probably every day, and it pops up on the top of the screen and it says Voice Secretary Reminder. And if I accidentally touch it, it says, in my voice, should you take a Seroquel? And the heading says, are you afraid of showering? So if I'm afraid of showering, it could mean that I need to take a Seroquel. Most days I don't see that pop up, and I think it just is one of those reminders that if you don't really see it, it just doesn't remind you again. But I accidentally pressed it, and so it said, should you take a Seroquel? And at that moment I was like, I don't even need this anymore. So that's one of my little safety tools that I am just getting rid of. I got rid of it. I erased that. So that was something. And I'm kind of excited when I get back home to take off this medical bracelet that I mainly got just for being in the States, in case I lost touch with reality and somebody just didn't know who I was or what was going on. And the chance of that was really small, but just having this sometimes, this reassurance is enough to reduce fear. So if something was happening that might make me feel like, oh my gosh, I'm unsafe, I don't have to feel more unsafe because I can't be safe when I'm unsafe. So these things have a place and time and context. And so when I get home, I'll be taking it off. And the last 3 weeks I've been off meds and I've been sleeping less, feeling rested more, up earlier in the morning. I wake up before my alarm at like 6:30. My alarm clock is usually that I have to go pee, and then I just feel awake and I'm up. And I've also been less hungry, and I've probably lost a bit of the weight that I gained since I've been here. And I've been trying to type up my notes, but I wrote so much. I wrote this, this, 2 pages there, page, 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 And the more I flip, the less I want to type it up. But then if I start talking about it, I'll just have more to write down. So we'll see what happens. I remember when I got here, I had this big phase of downloading a lot into a notebook and some into the computer. And I liked a notebook more before because I was always doing my videos outside. But now it's actually too hot to do them outside, so I do them inside so I can have the notes on my computer to just look at the computer screen. But now I have computer screen and notebook, so it's getting a bit intense. But I also feel more calm, like I don't have to get to this right away, I'll talk about it at some point. And it's actually given me a lot to talk about later on. And maybe I will just be slow with that and not really get to it until maybe when I go home and the weather starts getting more crappy. Because when I get home, the weather will be beautiful and I'll need to be outside as much as possible. So it'll be more about integrating into being back home, staying calm, staying in peaceful places, finding places in nature to be, being with my friends and family, and then talking about this other stuff like extrapolations when the weather starts changing, but still wanting to talk about some of them just to keep my brain in that mode of talking about them too, because right now it's writing a lot of them down, but it's not talking about them as often and as much as I was, especially recently. And now that I'm off meds, I just feel more like just being in reality and being in daily life and not feeling like I need to talk so much about this stuff. But there's a lot of new stuff coming through that is totally different. It's in the realm of the context that I want to create moving forward, that I talk to myself about, wondering if that's what would happen, and that's what's happening. So I do need to still talk about it because it's going to create that buffer of creating a new context net and web to sort of surround me with my own memes. So when I go home especially, I don't get swallowed up by the memes of the dominant paradigm. And I could just avoid it altogether, but I still want to be with some of my friends who are in the paradigm, so I'll still be exposed to it even if I'm not putting myself back into it. So we'll see how that goes. And tonight I'm going to see Wonder Woman, and I talked about going to see that. So I'm going to see it, and I'm wondering if there'll be things to extrapolate on that. And something I listened to yesterday, I think it was yesterday, yeah. It was a really awesome podcast by Ken Wilber on the Superhuman operating system. And I actually made a lot of notes on what he said as well as extrapolations, because it's totally what I'm feeling I need to move into in order to prevent the dominant paradigm from coming in and trying to dominate my consciousness. And so much of what he said is just so similar to the things that I've actually experienced, not just smiling and nodding at beautiful words and concepts and ideas, but feeling like really so-called mental illness is misunderstood superhumanity, or misunderstood getting acquainted with our actual capacities. And those capacities could be slightly different for each person, but it really is this superhuman quality, and it's a misunderstanding that people who go into that, it takes a while to understand it, and while they're in that vulnerable state, we have people coming in with their paradigm, getting us to understand it in the way that they would want to profit off of us. So I think there was a lot there in what I extrapolated. And I won't go into that at this exact moment, but I probably could sooner rather than later, because it's so important. And I actually am feeling more like organizing some of the extrapolations and not just going point by point, but reading through some and grouping them together to make it a little bit more coherent, because this next bit of context I create for myself, I feel needs to be more coherent, because this is the coherent story that I actually want to create and live in. The other one before, they were just points, and there was definitely some coherence to it, but it was just point and point and point. And that's okay, because it was sort of like making a point and then actually wanting to leave it behind. If I make a point about something about mental health, I kind of want to leave that behind and actually move into this new coherent story that I'm going to create for myself. So in that way, it would be good if it's a little bit more coherent, and maybe the brain will be on board with creating it in a more coherent way, because I feel like at some point I might just be able to speak and not speak from any kind of notes. So it'll go from more coherent notes, actually making them a bit more coherent, to just speaking one day when I've actually created enough of that context to just speak about it, and maybe speak about the journey and so many things. So anyways, yeah, I can just see that it would be good to talk about the Ken Wilber stuff, and then a lot of the different extrapolations I've had, put them into different themes and unfold them a little more coherently moving forward, possibly. I say that now, but things change day to day. And yesterday I was at the beach and it was so beautiful and perfect temperature, and I'd never been to that beach before until recently, and it's sort of my new favorite spot. And it was really busy, and I was driving in the parking lot with my friend, and I pretty much felt like I'd have to turn around and loop and go out of the parking lot, which would take a while even to just get out of the parking lot to find street parking. And then I said, I wonder if there's electric vehicle parking. And then 2 seconds later, I looked to my left, there's an empty electric vehicle parking spot. So I parked, I plugged in, I got parking close to the beach as opposed to far away, and I've never paid for a charge up of that thing, but it cost $1.19 for like 3 hours of charge. So that was awesome. And I've talked before about nutrient dependency and different people who talk about that, like Andrew Saul, and he has a really good video on YouTube about that. And just being on these micronutrients for a number of months, and now only on micronutrients for the last 3 weeks, I feel like it could be that I'm not mentally ill, I'm just nutrient dependent. And it makes sense that the body would need more nutrients to process the past and nutrients to deal with the present moment at the same time. And also the brain seems to be more powerful when it's initiated into this superhumanity and getting acquainted with one's gifts that are trying to manifest and basically come online. And I remember watching a really great documentary called Masks of Madness by Dr. Abram Hoffer, and I remember he said 80% of mental illnesses are nutritional problems, not mental problems. And so I wonder if at some point I'll become more acquainted with that. I was studying that a lot, and I never really gave a chance to the micronutrient products. I was doing different things like pyrrole disorder testing and different things, and that didn't really help. It's the micronutrients that help the most for me, just doing that protocol. So far, so good. And so I'm really curious about that. Maybe I'll be more interested in working in prevention and things with these types of products in some way. I don't know, because it's really helped me. I feel like my nervous system's stronger. I had an insight into the fact that meds just make the nervous system weaker. They kind of dull it out and make it weaker, but they don't heal anything. And now that I don't have that in my system, my nervous system feels so much stronger. Like I can actually really deal with the moment. And if stuff arises from the past, I can see it's from the past. It seems to me like these nutrients really help with that problem of lack of euphoric sensation that Dr. Daniel Siegel talks about. So it's interesting. The things that I've considered before, I'm now able to say are more likely than just wondering, because I'm actually living it. And I also realized this morning that when map consciousness is initiated, consciousness is starting to direct the body and not the ego. And since we all share consciousness, it's actually partly determined by our relationship, but not by the relationship of our egos and the images in our brains, but the actual images, the actuality of reality. It's calculating based on a different algorithm, and it feels like we don't have any control of ourself and volition because we're actually being moved and molded kind of like chess pieces. If one piece moves, that limits the next moves of the next player. So the space becomes more important, the relationship, and not the mechanism that divides up the space, which is the ego. So usually we have our ego that's dividing up the space and we act based on that. But when we're really in relationship, it's more directed by one's level of consciousness. So one's level of consciousness will create how the other person responds. Not exactly, we can't predict what it will be, but it will change what is possible and what's probable to a different set of quantum phenomena. So it's also the space that one creates by their beingness and the way they hold themselves and what they're doing. So if I crouch down on the street and start crying in a level of fear or something, people are going to respond to me differently than if I'm standing tall and expressing myself in a certain way. And lately I've been having some good insights right before I fall asleep, and then I'm too tired and lazy to get up and write them down, and I just drift off and forget about it. But it's okay, because it's infinite. I'll talk a little bit about the superhuman thing because it was really cool. And one of the things that Ken Wilber mentioned is that when we pursue our own particular lines of development, new capacities come online. And how this really resonated with me was how I've been talking about this so much, about how I pretty much have to create in order to discover those capacities. I can't just come upon them by wishful thinking or thinking I know what those capacities are, but just by pursuing these lines of development, different capacities come online, like the capacity to talk to myself for hours upon end, or now wondering what gifts I need to awaken within myself now that my nervous system is clear. So it's not something that we can even know what that is. We just have to go step by step, and I've been saying that one has to actually create oneself. So in a way, he's saying that. And I feel like mania is turning on the superhuman operating system. And this point is really missed because it turns on and the whole structure that one has to hold oneself together breaks down. And it takes a while for that to come online and us to learn those capacities that are much more powerful than the old capacities that we had. And the brain becomes so much more powerful that we can get those old capacities back, but it's trying to leave room for the new capacities to come online first until those old capacities come online and actually just take up all the brain space again. So the trouble is we don't have that space to heal and transform and discover our gifts. And again, it's a misunderstanding, it's a misperception of what's actually happening. We're trying to bandage up something that we think is so valuable in this me structure, this ego structure. But these other capacities will have a different operating system, and Ken Wilber calls it the superhuman operating system, and I would have to agree with that. And he says we have superhuman capacities, and that we have to awaken these capacities in our own being. And I think map consciousness awakens it, but we have to create from those capacities. And we try and we fail. But it seems that maybe there's certain lines of development or intelligence that Ken Wilber talks about that are underdeveloped. So when that superhuman creativity and capacity to create oneself comes online, then a lot of times we eventually burn out. And so we must awaken these in ourselves. They become awakened, but we need to create them. I might go more into the superhuman stuff later, but I wanted to say that one thing I realize is totally underdeveloped in me is business. And I was actually thinking maybe going back to school to take some business courses, because there's a lot I want to share, and I actually think of business as a way to share. And I don't have those skills, so maybe I can develop them or just have some sort of business help at some point. but I actually had more realizations about a business I might want to create. So I'll talk about it because I've done that before, but there was some more concrete ideas flowing through me. So maybe by talking about the superhuman stuff and this business stuff and integrating into home stuff, that will help with moving into what I want to create. And if I'm able to do that too, then it might be able to help other people who are creating themselves as superhumans also have some kind of business structure, so when they are getting connected with what they want to share, they can actually share it in a certain way. And I also thought of business as the language that we all understand. Everyone understands what a business is and what exchanging value is in terms of a business. But if somebody connects with this high energy and feels very creative and they just want to share, but there's no actual structure that's understandable, then it makes it very difficult to share. So that's another reason why I was thinking about that. And I forgot to mention about this downloading phase that I seem to be in again. I'm hoping that the micronutrients will help support not short-circuiting my brain. And it does feel more calm, and it does feel more embodied to just write down insights and not feel in such a hurry to speak about them. So much for putting things in order.